Shalom and good day all, this is Tehillim29, back again for another DC comic review. And in this DC comic review, I'll be covering Action Comics Superman, which actually covers the journey of what's happening with Midnighter, Detective Comics Batman, and last but not least, Deathstroke Inc., the latest issue. I just need to point out something. I will not be covering the backstories for Action Comics and Shadows of the Bat. So now it's time to begin on Action Comics. So, first things first, does this cover in any way, shape or form connect to something that's happening inside of the story? Sure enough it does, to which I give it the cover art a 7 out of 10. I'll now move into the internal story, to which I'll show you parts of the story, mainly the art and what's happening in the story around the beginning, middle, and of course the end. And like I said before, I will not be covering the backstory. Now, this is some of the beginning, or some of the art around the beginning, to which we have the character, which was also seen in one of the Superman annuals. And he was basically the storyteller, and he's, of course, referenced as like a bit of a storyteller. And his name is called Byla Esh, or Byla, for short. And this is some of the people that have somewhat been defeated that is being spoken about. As we start to move towards the middle of the story, we have the appearance of Midnighter, who also encounters Byla. And last but not least, some of the art towards the end of the story. So for the internal art, I gave it a 7 out of 10. Now it's time to move on to the story. Did we get any comic references? No, we didn't. But let's move on to the next area, which is the area of time. And we get a bit of an idea as to how long things are going. First, we are introduced to weeks ago, but then it changes to lunar rotations being used for the time. And I think that is actually very clever, especially for this story. And this is the order that it actually goes in the story. So the lunar rotation 17, 29, 36, 45, and 61. The location, we're still on Warworld. The cast of characters, starting with Byla Esh, to which, as you're reading this story, we have Byla Esh basically sharing some of the stories of Superman's heroics throughout the DC universe, and I think that's really cool. I think that's a really clever approach as to how this character is being used, and you get to like see some of the stories to which Superman has been in, to going up against Doomsday, to other villains that he's encountered that you do see being addressed in the story. Then finally the encounter with Midnighter, and he also gets to somewhat confirm a number of the stories, and we also get to see like a bit of a flashback to Superman in appearance, but we don't actually see Superman. So this is basically a story from Midnighter's perspective, and he's also and his encounter with Byla Esh on Warworld. Now it's and the overall story rating I gave for this was a 7.5 out of 10 because I liked the way how this story was done. It's now time to move on to the next story, and that's Detective Comics. So, jumping into first things first, does this cover in any way, shape, or form connect to something that's happening inside of a story? Sure enough, it does, to which I give it a 7 out of 10. I'll now jump to showing you some of the art, as well as some of the things that are happening story-wise, around the beginning, middle, and the end. And like I said before, I will not be covering the backstory. And as we move into some of the art around the beginning of the story, we have Bruce Wayne and Kate Kane meeting up with one of the people connected towards what's happening around the Arkham Tower. We have the suspects, and we have Nakano back again. Jumping a little bit further in regards to the story, and we've got Spoiler, and we've got a group who call themselves the Party Crashers, who are having their party crashed. Last but not least, we start to see a bit of a funeral in regards to what happened to one of the doctors at the tower, and Nakano there again. And last but not least, finishing off with Batman and also Harley overlooking Gotham with Huntress, and Batman overlooking Gotham in the distance, and what's to happen with one of the upcoming characters. For the internal art, I gave it a 7 out of 10. Now it's time to move on to the story. Did we get any comic references? No, we didn't. Did we get any indication of time or days that this has taken place in regards to the story? No, we didn't. No, it probably wouldn't have hurt. The location we had the tower in Gotham, or the Arkham Tower. We also had the mayoral office and one other place. Sorry, I've got bad writing here. My fault. But I can tell you the cast of characters though. Oh yes, a motel. That's what the other word I was looking for. I just wrote it badly. Cast of characters consisting of Batman and Batwoman. We also had talk of Scarecrow, James Weir, who ended up dying. We had Penguin, Psycho Pirate, Oracle, Nakano, Spoiler, and last but not least, Harley and Huntress. For this rating, I gave it a 7 out of 10. Now it's time for, last but not least, Deathstroke. Well, now it's time to jump into Deathstroke. And starting off with first things first, let's look at the cover and the rating I gave for it. Now, does this cover in any way, shape or form indicate something or show something that's connected to what's going to happen inside the story? Sure enough, it does, to which I gave the cover a 7.5 out of 10. I'll now show some of the internal art around the beginning, middle, and of course the end. Now, this is some of the art around the beginning. And we've got something happening here with the Secret Society, doing something somewhat behind Deathstroke's back. And last but not least, we've got Ravager and Respawn. Moving into some of the art a little bit closer to the middle, and we start to learn the origins as to how Respawn came about. And his own recollection of his defeat by Damian Wayne. And of course, what Slade Wilson, Deathstroke, actually thinks of him. And last but not least, some of the art towards the end. So for the internal art, I decided to give it a 7 out of 10, as I quite enjoyed the art, but I did feel it needed a little bit of pick up in some places. Jumping into the story and its racing. First things first, did we get any comic references? Sure enough, we did. We got some comic references to what's presently happening in one of the early Deathstroke issues. So the closest is issue 2 in reference to this. And of course, we were also referenced to some of the present Batman and Batman issue 121, or 116 to 121 of what happened with Batman overseas. Times we had in this were then and now. Moving into the locations, we encountered the area of Zandia, to which they were going to meet up with Deathstroke. And last but not least, towards the end of the story, especially around the epilogue, we had the area of Metropolis, to which we encounter Lex Luthor. A cast of characters consisting of Ravager, Respawn, Deathstroke. We, of course, had Prometheus and the Secret Society. And last but not least, towards the end, the Legion of Doom. Meeting up with Lex Luthor, or talking to Lex Luthor. So, for this story, I ended up giving it a 7.5 out of 10, as things draw closer to going into Shadow War. Well, until then, have yourself an awesome day, and let's keep it colourful.